It's a bird. It's a plane. It's rising. But that's the news show we host. Hello, Briahna.
Hello, Robby.
What I was supposed to read was even sillier, so I just said something off the top of my head.
It should never change. I'm delighted.
All right, well, what is going on our show today? Let's find out, shall we?
Well, first off the bat, yesterday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an impassioned plea before the United Nations General Assembly. Let's check in.
Evil cannot be trusted. Ask Prigozhin if one bets on Putin's promises. Please hear me. Let unity decide everything openly. While Russia is pushing the world to the final war, Ukraine is doing everything to ensure that after Russian aggression, no one in the world will dare to attack any nation. Weaponization must be restrained. War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home, and the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it, and we'll do it. Slava Ukraini!
Now, Zelensky is set to head to Capitol Hill tomorrow in a visit coordinated with the Biden administration to encourage Congress to approve the White House's supplemental request for $24 billion more for Ukraine. However, the embattled leader may not receive as warm a welcome as he expects. Here's Florida Representative Byron Donalds from the Hill yesterday.
The first thing I'll tell you is there's no money in the House right now for Ukraine. It's not there.
You mean there's no support for money?
No. And to be blunt, we're running a $2 trillion deficit. Any money we give to Ukraine, we're borrowing from our future. That's the facts. Those are the truth. Anybody, you feel how you want to feel about it. I'm here to tell you what's right and what's real. I mean, look, it's not a good time for him to be here, quite frankly. That's just the reality. And the third piece is what's happened with Ukraine is frankly the fault of leadership of Joe Biden. Let's be very clear of that. So don't put that on the backs of the American people now. If we had a commander-in-chief who knew how to lead as opposed to take naps, then we would be in a much better situation when it comes to Ukraine and global security for that matter.
Meanwhile, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy said he wants to question Zelensky and secure accountability for American taxpayers.
Is Zelensky elected to Congress? Is he our president? I don't think I have to commit anything. I have questions for him. Where's the accountability on the money we already spent? What is the plan for victory? I think that's what the American public wants to know. Look, what Russia has done in invade is wrong. It's an atrocity, and we want to make sure that ends. I also have always said from the beginning, no matter what the issue is, I want accountability for whatever the hardworking taxpayers spend their money on, and I want a plan for victory.
Oof. So, it does seem like these conservatives in the House are reflecting a strong and growing sentiment among the American people that the amount of money that's going out the door to Ukraine seems to be in stark conflict with the limited spending here for the American people. Now, I have to point out that those same House Republicans tend to vote down domestic spending as well. They seem to want to bring the deficit down entirely, even though they will frame it as we could be spending that money here. Still, I do think that they are right about the lack of accountability with respect to spending in Ukraine and the hypocrisy of Democrats who will be very happy to aggressively push for these kinds of things, never have any hold up in Congress for funding these kinds of things, but seem to throw their hands up in the air as to why, when it comes to questions about why they have betrayed so many of their promises to the Democratic voters who put them in office, hoping for domestic spending in the first instance.
Right. Byron Donalds is considered an extremist by the mainstream media and the establishment. Kevin McCarthy is, beholden to MAGA if he's not MAGA himself. Listen to them. Those were completely reasonable statements, weren't they? That was, we need basic accountability. We don't owe Zelensky anything at this point. We've been incredibly generous with our American taxpayer dollars. Those are questions, the questions they're raising there are questions that they don't even need to be partisan questions. Democrats can and should be raising them. It's what is this money going to be spent for? What's the plan to wind this war down? We don't need to automatically give Zelensky everything he asked for. He is not the president of the United States. What is the plan? These are such basic questions that American voters, American taxpayers deserve answers to. it's astounding that it's only coming from the lips of Byron Donalds and Kevin McCarthy. Where are the Democrats on this?
I mean, well, there are some voices. We have seen people like Ro Khanna pretty consistently on this. He was one of the few that pushed back against the pushback of the letter that came out last summer, where some progressives were trying to say, hey, can you at least try to be thinking about negotiating an end to this war? And there have been some anti-war voices, but I agree that in terms of a united front coming from a party itself, the Republicans are doing a much better job of framing this as their issue. I wanted to ask you what you thought about Zelensky's use of the word final war as he was making his plea to the UN. You know, is that persuasive? Does it seem hyperbolic? Does it seem almost like exploiting people's legitimate fear of World War III to get money? But the irony seems to be that by pursuing this proxy war, we are inching closer to the doomsday clock having both hands on zero.
Yeah, let's remember what this is actually a conflict over. It's a conflict over whether the eastern parts of Ukraine should be part of Ukraine or part of Russia or have some kind of self-determination, given that it's a messy situation because some of the people there want to remain part of Ukraine, and it is part of Ukraine, but also some of the people there are Russian-speaking and feel more affection for Russia and feel more part of Russia, and it's changed hands a number of times. It doesn't seem very liberal, Western, pro-democracy to me to say that a country's borders can never change, or that there's no right to some sort of separation and self-determination. Obviously, like, secession has a very ugly history, specifically in the American context, but even in the context of the Civil War, right? West Virginia pulled away from Virginia because they wanted to support, because they felt more in line with what the Union's position was, and we allowed that. Our Constitution allows for that, actually, for states that are in open rebellion to have to split in that way. That's about the only way you can split a state. So I don't think it makes sense to advance the argument that this is an affront to liberal democracy, that this part of this country would go a different way. So are we going to fight World War III over that? Zelensky wants to make it sound like it's a conflict over the existence of Ukraine, that Russia is trying to conquer and subjugate all of Ukraine. What Russia is doing is wrong, because the military option is never the right option, and they launched this was an invasion that they started. So I'm not at all detracting from Putin's moral responsibility here, but we have no reason to think that conquest of the entire country, that Kyiv becoming part of Russia is what's on the agenda. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm curious, there's also this interesting media angle where it does seem like the mainstream media has been increasingly critical of the pro-Ukrainian lens that has been endemic to it for the majority of this war. There was an article about the market bombing that killed 15 people a little while ago. Initially, the New York Times reported, Ukrainian sources reported that it had been a Russian bomb, and the timing of that particular incident and the reporting seemed to be useful to those who would be trying to get more financial support from the United States, showing an escalation on the part of Russia, killing civilians, obviously a horrible crime. Now, subsequently, the New York Times wanted to send people in to investigate the actual bombing to see if it was, in fact, of Russian in origin. They were barred from doing so by Ukrainian officials. The New York Times managed to conduct their own investigation anyway. And earlier this week published a follow-up story that was much less prominently featured, but nonetheless in the New York Times, saying that they had evidence that it was actually a Ukrainian bomb that accidentally bombed its own marketplace. Now, in response, the Ukrainian media sources are saying, absolutely not. We have subsequent evidence, et cetera. But you're getting this interesting pushback now that didn't necessarily exist before, and the public response to the media finally saying, look, you cannot credit every single Ukrainian news or political source that tells you that those dastardly Russians have done something cruel and evil. We're now seeing multiple examples of accidental bombings of oneself. There was the whole question about who was really responsible for that dam being destroyed some months ago. And finally, some skepticism is creeping into the media lens. But now that even the New York Times is getting an incredible amount of pushback for simply reporting their findings in their independent investigation, which, by the way, the Ukrainians tried to block in the first place, into what the actual cause of that horrific bombing was.
I'm glad to hear the New York Times is doing a better job with this. I hadn't quite noticed that, but I believe what you're saying. On cable news, unfortunately, I'm still seeing a lot. I mean, they're in love with TV news is in love with war reporting, kind of in general, the on-the-ground people, and talking about it. And it is horrible. I'm not underplaying how horrible it is. I wish Russia hadn't done this. If we had a way to prevent or deter this action that would not result in World War III, I would seriously consider taking it. But the reality is we have to look out for U.S. interests, and it's not in U.S. interests to have a greater confrontation with Russia over whether part of Ukrainian territory is not going to be part of Ukraine anymore.
Zelensky is
and we're not obligated to because it's not part of NATO.
Yeah.
We're not obligated to defend them.
Zelensky is characterizing this as the final war, but it almost feels like they're angling for it to be a final war. It will only be the final war.
If we treat it like that, it will be.
Exactly.
Well, now Biden also spoke in front of the UN General Assembly yesterday, where he took the following shots toward Russia.
Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately. And it's Russia alone that stands in the way of peace, because Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation, Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's children. Russia believes that the world...
Yeah, I mean, that's right in line with what Zelensky is saying, that these are extremely stark moral stakes. And I mean, if you believe this, if you believe this is the last war, this is the great war is here, I mean, why are we then just contributing meager amounts of money and second and third rate weaponry? And why is our Congress not declaring war on Russia?
Yeah.
I mean, the reason is obvious, but that explains why these statements are actually empty, and this rhetoric and it's saber rattling, and I don't think it's helpful.
And who is it for? Politically, Biden has to know this is a non-starter. And yet he continues. If he were to say,
I don't know.
There's no blank check for Ukraine. We want to support our allies against illegal aggression from Russia, but we don't have a blank check. He could strip so much of the energy away from his opponents like RFK Jr. and people on the right who are really getting a lot of traction off of being the anti-war candidate. And I don't know. It's very confusing posture to me for him to be taking. We'll see how it goes. But let us know what you think about this recent development. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.